Hi, I'm Tim of the 1916 Company, and welcome to Collector Conversations. Today, we have an unprecedented collection from a collector like none other. I'm astounded to say that not a single watch we're going to encounter today has ever featured on an episode of this program. Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, you started, as most people do, with familiar brand watches, and my goodness, then you went off into your own world. So the journey from there to here is a long one. Take me back to the first steps.
So the first watch that started this collection is this Breitling Navitimer. My father, who's unfortunately no longer here with us, got this for me for my 21st birthday. The long story to this is that when I was turning 21, a few months before, he comes up to me and said, you know, you have a big birthday coming up. What would you like? 21st, it's a big date. My friends at the time, they were going on vacation to Acapulco. So I'm thinking, okay, booze, girls, vacation, why not? I said, okay, so you want to go to Acapulco for your 21st?
This is around 2007 or so?
Yeah, 2007. He says, so you want to go on vacation with your friends to Acapulco? Okay, so go work and go to Acapulco. Like, so what was the point of asking me? You're asking me what I want, I'm telling you, you're telling me, no, go ahead. I said, I'm gonna get you something that's gonna last you more than a week. It's gonna last you generations, and it's something that you're gonna remember me by. And at the time, Breitling was very popular. It was one of the hot brands in the mid-2000s. And a friend of mine, I used to hang out with older people, like the older crowd. He got himself a Breitling Bentley edition. It was those huge, big Breitlings, with the Bentley collaboration. And that was like the hottest watch. So Breitling was very popular at the time. And I figured, let me tell my father, okay, you want to get me a watch? I want a Breitling. Thinking that he would say, are you out of your mind? I'm not going to get you a Breitling. I'll get you a Timex, a Seiko, something on the lower end scale. He said, okay, you want a Breitling? Okay. And then for my 21st birthday, he presents me a box, and the rest is history. It's this Breitling Navitimer. Rarely wear it now because it has just so much sentimental meaning to me that I don't want anything to happen to it. It's in pretty much mint condition after all these years. I wore it the first few years when I got it, a couple of times maybe because I was too young. So I didn't want to wear this expensive thing on my wrist to go out when I was 21, 22, 23.
And in Brooklyn, when you were younger, that would have really stood out.
When you're younger, yeah. If you're a bit older, no. But if you were younger, yeah. Especially at the time, Breitling was hot. It was like the it brand. So then around 24, I started wearing it more often. And I really started looking at watch photos, talking. I had a friend of mine at the time, he was also older, he was really into watches. He would always discuss watches and movements and all these brands, and he would tell me about Gerald Genta before I even knew who Gerald Genta was. And that kind of got me, my curiosity peaked, and I started doing more research and looking into other brands. And I always had a taste for watches that are different. I like the dial. To me, watch is art. It's art on your wrist in every way, starting from the dial to the movements, but I'm not really much of a movement guy. I'm more of a aesthetic, visually pleasing, and just something different. I like something that you won't see very often, or rarely see, or even never see. And I like something that just makes you go, wow, what is that? Because that's what catches my attention.
Now, in the earliest days of collecting, you said where you come from, there was a lot of focus on Rolex, Audemars Piguet, and Patek Philippe. The brands that you tended to see most commonly would have been like Omega, would have been Breitling, would have been Rolex. And I guess initially that's sort of where you devoted your energy and attention, because you did actually get into Rolex not too long after the Navitimer, as you kind of took that step into the next phase of your collecting journey. There were some reversals that you had to undo, weren't there? Mm-hmm.
So at around 2012, it was 2 years after I started a business and working in e-com, I wanted to commemorate certain successes in the business by getting a watch. And I started binging almost on watches. That, to me, I said to myself that every year that I have a good year in business, I'm gonna commemorate it with a watch. And it's gonna be a different watch, and it's gonna be something that I'll remember those little milestones by. So in about 2012, maybe 2013, I can't remember, I decided I'm gonna get a Rolex because that's what everybody gets when they've made a little bit of money, as something to just remind themselves of an accomplishment, I guess. And I got the Datejust 2 with, it had the Roman numerals, but at the 9 o'clock, it had a stick marker. I got it on the Oyster Perpetual bracelet in two-tone. I enjoyed it for a certain amount until I wanted something that you're not gonna see, because growing up in a Russian-speaking community in Brooklyn, there's only 3 brands that everybody knows. It's Rolex, AP, and Patek, and it's almost like nothing else exists. There's just those 3 brands. There's no world outside of those 3 brands. And the people who would get those watches, it was more of a status symbol and a flex, as they call it nowadays, where the watch walks into the room before you do. Oh, look what's on my wrist. And I don't like that. I like more stuff that, if you know, you know. I'm more of a collector's collector. I like watches that, to a regular person, they will not know what it is. But a true collector will notice right away, oh, what is that? Oh, I've never seen it. Oh, can I see it? So I started getting into the independent hole. And my first independent brand was this Bovet right here, the Sportster Saguaro.
So now, about what point was this? What year are we talking?
This was 2014, maybe 15.
And you mentioned that you didn't like to take vacations, like kick back the way people conventionally did, but you did like to reward yourself with watches.
Yes.
So was this a milestone watch for a momentous time at work, or something happened in your career?
So no, with the vacations, the first 3 years of business, I was reinvesting all the money that I was making. I was working 17, 18-hour days. I was barely sleeping. My only free time, maybe an hour, go to the gym, come back in the computer working. Friends were going on vacations. I remember they went to Colombia, Panama, group trips. Jan, come. No, I can't. Why? I don't want to. I need to work. I felt like I didn't deserve to go.
Okay.
What do I need a vacation from? I need to work. I just started a business not too long ago. What do I need a vacation? I need to work. I figured I could take those trips at any time later on. The trips aren't going to go anywhere. But the watches, they kind of stay with you. And you commemorate those occasions because watches, they symbolize time. And time is one thing that once it's gone, we can't really get it back. So I would commemorate certain achievements with a watch. How I found out about the Bovet, I seen a photograph of Puff Daddy, not a popular name right now, but at the time, he was coming out of some party or some event and he had something on his wrist and it was a Bovet. And at the time, I didn't know about Bovet. But I figured, it must be something if Puff Daddy's wearing it, must be some kind of...
If someone who can afford anything wears that, there must be something up.
Good way to put it. But I started looking into the brand, and what I liked about them was that the pushers are all on top instead of being on the side, and that the watch, they started making models that you could take off the strap and it becomes a pocket watch. So even with this one, the pusher's on top, you can't take this one off and turn it into a pocket watch, but it still kind of looks like a table clock or a pocket watch due to the pushers being on top, which also give it almost like a crown-like look to it.
And also, it's got the ergonomics of not really having any conventional lugs. So it's a 46, but it doesn't wear that way.
Yeah, because it's only really one lug over here, and it's not even a conventional lug.
And then it's an unusual watch. I mean, the Sportster Saguaro, the version that came out in 2011, in the bigger case, it's got 300-meter dive depth. It's got a big date. It's got a pulsation scale. It's got rose gold. It's got steel. It's a very individual aesthetic. And I guess that must have been what drew you to Bovet.
Yes, and also with this model, what I really liked about it was, once I did the research on the company, it was an entry level. It was a good way to enter without having to shell out a few kidneys for a watch. And this watch really caught my attention. I seen it being sold online. The seller was based out of New York. I contacted him and I said, instead of, at the time the listing was on eBay, let's meet in person. I would like to come to your office or wherever you are. I want to see the watch. Went to 47th Street. He had a shop, one of the corner shops. Looked at the watch. Instantly fell in love with it because also the subdials are made of the mother of pearl, which is also very rare to see, and yet especially on a subdial. You don't often see mother of pearl dials, and you almost never see them on a subdial. And everything about the watch was just beautiful to me. I like the two-tone aspect of it. also the thickness of the case. And this is, circa 2014, 15. At the time, huge watches were the it watches. No one was wearing small watches, really. And I really liked the thickness of it.
Yes.
It has presence. And at the same time, it looked completely different than anything else at the time that I was exposed to due to the pushers. And even the running second hands is this squiggly hand, which looks a bit odd compared to the other hands, but it gives it character. It's something different.
And it got you into a brand that was making at that point hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of watches a year. You got into a very elite cadre of owners putting a Bovet in the collection. And I guess that sort of whetted your appetite for having something that's just really, really different because you never looked back.
So after that one, I wanted something else that is similar but different. Similar in the sense of has presence, has an interesting dial that's super unique and also unique to the brand itself.
Yes.
And that's when I went with a Louis Monet. The funny thing is, I know that Louis Monet, the man, was the creator of the chronograph. And for years, I thought it was the company, but they were completely separate of each other, yeah. I thought, like, oh, Louis Monet, when I would wear this in my head, I'm like, oh, they created the chronograph. But in reality, it was the man named Louis Monet.
Yes.
But the company had nothing to do with him. And
the company, though, I mean, let's face it, it's been a long time since a Jaeger or Lecoultre has been active at JLC, or a Patek or Philippe at Patek Philippe. But the modern Monet brand is very, I would say, bold. You've got a watch here that's exactly what you described. It's got a lot of high impact visuals on the front. You've got the secondary time zone, you've got rose gold, you've got steel, you've got a chronograph, and then you have those very unique sub-registers, and I can't say I've ever seen this material used on any other watch.
So it's interesting. So Louis Monet, this is a version. So this is the geograph, but this version is the rainforest, where the sub-dials, they're actually made from fossilized palm wood that is 700 years old. Allegedly. I didn't get a geologist to come and take
I'm sure
a
it
look.
hasn't been carbon dated, but I'll take the word.
But I thought it was very interesting, and also is from the forests in Asia. This wood came from there, and they would also donate proceeds from every watch sold to foundations to benefit the rainforest there. So I thought it was a very interesting watch, and also there was only 120 of them made. So this one right here is number 65 of 120, which again, I like rare watches, and especially ones that are numbered in limited quantities, because I know that I won't see this in the wild. It's very unlikely. Maybe somewhere I'll see another one of the other 119 people who might have one, but it's very rare. So that's another thing I like with watch collecting, is having something that you won't really see.
And I can confirm that it's rare. That came out in 2011, and yours is the only example I've encountered. And I'll also say this too. It's an interesting brand. It's a smaller brand. It's a brand that does things that are distinctively different. But if you go by dial design, if you're driven by aesthetics, and I think most collectors are but don't admit it, I think you embrace that you really look for aesthetics first.
Yeah.
So where did it lead you from Louis Monet?
Somewhere around circa 2019, I took a hiatus from watch collecting. The passion wasn't there anymore. I stopped wearing watches.
Was it burnout?
It might have been, yeah, like watch fatigue. Sometimes I even get it now. I'll watch YouTube videos for hours. I'm like, I'm burnt out. I'm like, I can't look at watches anymore. So it might have been that, because it was just a year after year after year of just collecting and commemorating certain milestones. I guess I just got fatigued from watches. I was burned out. So for a few years, till about 2022, I didn't wear watches and I didn't collect watches. And then what pulled me back in was I started preferring smaller sized watches. I would walk by, I would have it all in these watch boxes. Like, man, these things just look so huge. I still love them, don't get me wrong. I love watches in all shapes, sizes, colors, dials. As a watch lover, I love them all. From micro brands, to independent brands, to modern brands. I like when a brand decides, hey, I'm gonna do something completely left field. I'm gonna go for it.
And your collection certainly developed in that direction, because the watches on the table here, they're all extremely low volume from extremely small brands. but they're also fairly recent releases. So walk me through some of these unconventional choices. This was an all-new direction as you moved away from mainstream brands and models.
It started with that right there.
We're going way back. We're going
Yes,
back.
yes.
You came from Ukraine in 1992 as a young man, but this predates even your childhood. This
Yes.
is a creature of the 80s. Tell
For
me about
all I know,
this.
this might be my birth year watch. It's hard to reference Cartiers with the years they were made, even though on the case back, this is in near mint condition, and you can still see the serial number on the case back.
Oh, yes.
So this watch in your hand, that is my everything. That is my favorite watch of all time. It is my favorite watch in my collection. It is just, to me, that is one of the best watches of all time. So,
And just to be clear, this is fully mechanical. This is not quartz right here. This is a mechanical, automatic winding watch. It's got that classic Cartier Santos sort of aesthetic where the watch is thin, the watch is compact, the bracelet is massive, and you've got that sort of simulacrum of rivets, the interlocking links. I don't think I've experienced a watch of this age that has more structural integrity of the bracelet. There is zero lateral play. It feels as fresh as the day I left Switzerland, honestly.
so with this watch, I'm also a huge film buff.
Yes.
So Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas, in the movie Wall Street, which is one of my favorite movies, his character Gordon Gekko wore this watch. And he's an iconic character, and this was the watch he wore. So what's interesting was, in the 80s, this was Cartier's answer to the Day-Date.
Yes.
And I feel like if I was a young adult in the 80s, this is the watch I would have had if I was going for a gold watch. This watch, to me, the design language, from the screws on the links to the case, the dial, it's classic, it's elegant, but at the same time, it's opulent and it's a bit gaudy, but in modern times, it's not gaudy anymore because it's 29 millimeters.
Yeah, it's almost like you go to a really fine restaurant and you spend a phenomenal amount of money to get quality, but good taste comes in smaller portions.
So what's interesting with this watch, so this model, aside from obviously the size, they don't make it as the carré model, which in French is square, because in the 87 they introduced the galbé version, and galbé means more round.
Yes.
So this one, I think, to me, the carré version of so the links, they're very, if you move around the bracelet,
Oh, without doubt.
they're very, almost like little shapes in itself, like little bricks put together.
And the interlink of them feels like a bracelet construction that is much more current than the age of this watch. Like, I've seen just in the last few days a brand new Chopard Alpine Eagle that uses exactly the same assembly with the countersink of link to link, and it feels like the strongest bracelet I've encountered in years on a watch of that size, aspect ratio, and thickness. The fact that this was being made back in the 80s, it is astounding to feel how robust this bracelet is. You would swear, if you didn't know the age of the watch and check the hallmarks, that this is a new product. And it's sharp too. It hasn't seen a refinisher's wheel, or if it has, very, very professionally. This is probably, well, I would say without a doubt, unless we're counting mid-2000s Breitling, this is your only venture into vintage that I can see on the table.
On the
at least.
table, yes. Yes.
So now, did you jump straight from here to the, I guess, spiritual successor, or maybe was it a more circuitous journey?
So next came this right here.
Dietrich.
Yes. So Dietrich. So the interesting story with this watch, I would have to connect it to the Kollokium Projekt one and also this Raketa.
The Raketa Horophile.
Yeah. So the way they're connected is, I seen a video, I watch a lot of these collectors videos from different companies. So Amer, one of the three founders of Kollokium, he was on Swiss Watch Gang and he had a huge collection. And he had a collaboration with his color, which is purple. He loves the purple color, violet. And he had this Dietrich. And at the time, I wanted a micro brand. And decades ago, when I first got into collecting, micro brands weren't really a thing. They weren't really around.
And that watch, that design dates back to at least 2015, so it was way ahead
Possibly 14 even?
Yeah,
I would
it was
say.
way ahead of, I guess, the move toward micro brands is very cool. And I would also say that what we associate with a modern micro brand is something that is distinctively designed, reasonably priced, and yet somehow not common. And that watch is all of those.
So when I saw this watch, right away, I need to have it. Because the design language, to me, what I like about it, there's no lugs. The strap goes underneath. So the case size, I believe, is 46, but it doesn't look 46. And it wears so comfortably. And I have, until this watch, I've never seen a watch where the strap just goes through the bottom of the watch and just kind of wraps around the wrist.
Now, were you drawn to the color scheme? Because I'm loving the combination of the neon green, the black, and the silver.
So this watch actually came with 3 straps.
Okay.
I ended up putting it on the green strap because it was the most unique. So it had a black leather with green stitching, and then it had a fabric strap. But this, to me, kind of gave it a more of a feng shui look because of the hands.
Yes, it matches.
Matching, yep. And what's interesting, so Emmanuel Dietrich, the way I actually got, so this is the OT-1, the Organic Time 1. There was 13 of them. There was OT-1 all the way to the 13. So before I got this, I looked online and I see on eBay, there's an OT-13. It's a blue dial and the hands are kind of green. So that watch is very significant to him. So his sister, unfortunately, was killed in Paris, 2013, I believe it was. 13?
And it was a terrorist attack.
Yeah. So he wanted to make 13 pieces of that watch, thus the OT-13, for friends and family, to kind of commemorate his sister and give it to friends and family. I seen that watch on eBay. Right away, the fact that there's only 13 of them made and it has some significance to somebody, to the watchmaker, I knew I wanted it. I buy the watch, I look, the seller has perfect feedback, 100%, he sells different watches, micro brands, brands. I buy the watch. I'm excited, I see it's out for delivery. Watch comes in this big USPS box. I'm a fool for not, it didn't occur to me to take a video of me unboxing. So I opened the box. Inside is the Dietrich box. I opened that box, inside a booklet with all of his watches, all the Organic Time watches from 1 to 13, the pouch, there's no watch. The seller sent me everything but the watch. Yep. I'm thinking, okay, am I going crazy? I'm looking everywhere for 5 minutes. I'm asking my sister, I'm like, Lori, come over here. Do you see a watch in here? Help me look, maybe it fell out. Nothing, no watch. I contact the seller. He tells me I shipped you the watch. So now I know it's his word versus mine,
Right.
but I know what I received. I received the Dietrich box, the booklet, the papers, the pouch for the watch. And I know the box, the shipping box wasn't tampered with. So he sent me everything but the watch. I was able to, through PayPal and eBay, went on his side. I ended up contacting Chase and I spoke to a client assistant and they refunded me the money right away. So then I decided, you know what, let me go for the OT-1. I guess that was my sign because I really like this green color. I love green. When I was a kid, was my favorite color. All shades of green. Yep. So I'm like, you know what, I guess that's a sign that I need to get the OT-1, which was the original. And actually it was the OT-69. The 69 was his birth year. But it was the same pretty much case and look. It just, instead of OT-1, it just said OT-69. So I found another seller, got this. This time I did a unboxing video just in case. Watch was there, everything was there. The rest is history. And for this to be a micro brand, it's astonishing because it is so interesting. When you look at the dial, there's 4 different levels. It's not even a 3D dial. There's just it's almost like an elevator. You just have floors.
Yeah, you're looking down almost into a stadium, and it's got all these tiers, and then you finally reach the base and the movement.
Yep, and inside you have brushed finishes there. You have the minute and the hour indices. They're up against the glass.
They're silk screened onto the bottom, yeah.
Yep, and they're all luminous. And then you have these green luminous hands. Now, on the top left of the dial, you have a 24-hour counter, which is also loomed. So you know if it's AM or PM. And then you have this seconds hand, which is not really a hand because it's a rotating star, but I think it's an interesting touch. And then you have the movement inside beating away all the way in the depth of these layers. So to me, this was just, it's still one of my favorite watches. And for the price point and the fact that it was a micro brand, you don't see this anywhere.
I agree with you. And I would even say that it's rare to see a watch that distinctive to the point where I saw it on the table and I immediately knew what it was and who made it. Like, there's no confusion, there's nothing derivative about it. And for a watch that's not small, It's also not big. It's 46, like you said, but lug to lug, it's only 47, and it's almost lugless. So it's both
Super
a great
comfortable,
design and great ergonomics. So we may as well jump to two watches that are related now. Let's talk about the one that's green, because we're going from one green to another. Now we're at Kollokium. We're at the Project 1.
Very
and
indeed.
So tell me about the folks behind this,
So
because what a
this
machine.
watch, I got this watch about a week ago.
Is that the newest edition?
Yeah,
We're skipping around a little bit.
So it came out October 1st, and I was away. I went to Dominican Republic. My birthday is October 4th. So I was away. They dropped this variant D in 299 pieces. At the time, to be quite honest, a lot of the watches, this one and this watch, for example, you can't photograph them. They don't photograph well. You need to see a watch in person, because no amount of, you're not able, the lens of a camera is not able to capture what the eye can see. So with this watch, when it first came out, through photos and videos, I'm like, what is that? I'm like, that looks strange. It looks like that, the pop art, the pin art from the 90s. And I decided that I'm gonna hold off on it. It did catch my attention because it was different, which I like.
Yes.
But at the same time, I thought it looked odd. And then during New York Watch Week, I went to an analog shift event. And as I'm walking around, I'm kind of like wrist browsing. And I see somebody having a conversation. I'm like, wait a second, that's a Kollokium. I could finally see this thing in person. So I come by and, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation. That's a Kollokium. Yeah, it's the variant D. So D sold out instantly. So I believe October 1st to launch, 299 pieces. Instantly sold out within minutes. So he has this on his wrist. Do you want to try it on? I'm like, no, but I would like to take a look at it. Can I take a photograph? And what I noticed is that the dial is also 3D. Depending on which angle you look at, it almost has these waves, because so there's 468 cylinders. They're all hand placed from the back of the dial. And for the hour markers, they're raised a little bit higher than the other ones.
They're all like little pilings, but
Yes.
the pilings are thicker for the hours.
Yes. So depending on which angle you look, it looks different, because some are higher, some are lower. And also the loom on this thing is insane. The whole thing looms up. The super luminova, hand placed on each one. Everything is done by hand. Super, just, it lights up, and it reminds me of when you're flying into JFK at night from a trip somewhere, and you're flying back into New York, the way the buildings are light up, the way the city's lit up at night.
You're staring down into these pillars of light. Yeah.
Yes. And then also through the side, I like the box crystal.
Yeah, that really is the epitome of like the glass box. We've seen like training wheels versions of that elsewhere. This is the boxiest glass I've ever seen in a glass box fashion.
And it's interesting because the build quality and the finish is so spectacular. So this was a die cast, I believe it's called, process, where they had to pour the metal with like high temperatures, I believe.
And it leaves a very coarse finishing and surfacing, a matte finish.
So it's supposed to be inspired, kind of like a neo-brutalist, and it has this very brutal, raw look to it.
It's got a lot of straight lines, it's got a lot of sharp crevices, there's a lot of definition to the lugs, the way they run almost in a cradle form under the case from end to end. And I definitely see that, and I could also see it a little bit in the profile of the crown, which is angular, sharp. It's a non-circular crown.
Yeah. And what's interesting is also you could see the indices through the side.
They're elevated.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, and you can see it because no watch really does this. Due to the box crystal, you're able to look at it from the side, from the top, and from the side it looks like buildings. Like if you look in Manhattan, it looks like, if you look out a window, you see it looks like buildings.
And I can even see that they're kind of humorous on the back. They have a large block of text in German, and then underneath for the rest of us, basically a Swiss-made watch that can get wet. So I find it incredibly funny. This is a remarkably fun watch. This is a watch that you could tell that Manuel Emsch was involved in this company, because when...
The strap?
A million different things. When Jacques Hedreau and Romain Giron and Louis Erard all were at their commercial peak, he was always the man behind that, and it was always driven by style.
So the strap is very interesting. It's fabric strap. It's very unconventional for a more, for a non, Apple Watch, I guess
Yeah, I would say it's got a little bit of Apple Watch and maybe a little bit of tactical in it.
Okay.
A little bit of both, I think. It's like an Erica's original style strap. It's got a really utilitarian look to it. Like brutalism is the watch and brutalism is the strap.
Feels unfinished
It does.
to me, yeah. Also, what I really like is that fluorescent green seconds hand. I feel like it gives it an interesting, which is the variant D, because previous models, I believe, had an orange one.
Yes.
And then maybe a white one or a grayish one.
And it's also fun that the counterweight of the seconds hand is the shape of the crown.
Yes.
There's a lot of good attention to detail here.
Yeah, and this is one of the two watches on this table, along with this one, where to really get a good feel for it, you need natural light.
Yes.
Natural light and different angles.
So now, Amercindi is part of the trio behind Kollokium, but he was much more individually in the driver's seat for the spectacular Raketa Avant-Garde. This is the, well, you tell me about this incredible 50-piece limited edition, because that is Horophile derived.
So, I was born in '86. I was born in the USSR, when all the Russian-speaking countries were still together. So Raketa is actually, aside from being the most famous, their history is just incredible. So they go back to the 1700s when the Emperor Peter the Great, he opened up a watch factory. And at the time they were doing cuts of jewelry, I guess, for the Tsars and stuff. And Raketa still wasn't known as Raketa until 1961, I believe. So in the 40s, the company that predates Raketa was called Pobeda, which in Russian it means victory. And they were making watches after World War II. And then in 1961, cosmonaut, which is the Russian word for astronaut, Yuri Gagarin, he made the first manned mission, first space flight, manned space flight.
Yes.
So in honor of him, they renamed from Pobeda to Raketa, which in Russian means rocket, that you launch into space. And that's kind of where the brand was born, Raketa. And they make their own in-house movements. All their movements are made in-house in their factory in St. Petersburg. And this dial specifically, man, what a dial.
What a dial and what a crystal. Oh my gosh, it's as round as the moon. Everything about this watch shows a highly refined taste, but also a sense of humor.
Take a look in the light. It goes from kind of black to purple to a matte brushed purple color.
And it really does shift completely to black and then almost an electric purple, and ever present, you've got the white and the orange accents. Also a high degree of angularity, everything from the fonts used to the hands themselves. And by the way, the loop hand is absolutely brilliant. It's got a surprising amount of depth because of the loft of the crystal, and then the way the hands are broad, distinctive and superimposed. And it does have sort of like a top to bottom satin grain, almost brushed like a 5235 Patek. Really nice angular lugs, but broken out from the case band, not integrated like a Carrera. This is, again, I'm sort of inspired by the the vintage Patek Philippe 3448 and the 5235 that takes after it. It's got a very, I think the common thread here is that they're both derived from vintage cases, and Raketa is sort of referencing its own history from the 20th century. A lovely little red-capped, multiply knurled crown. And as you mentioned, it is their own automatic movement. I think this is actually their 2014 movement, which has got a nice, charming, slow beat rate.
So a few interesting things about this watch, which goes with what I like. Aesthetic, design, only 50 pieces of this were made. So again, it's very limited. You're not gonna see it on everyone's wrist. And this dial, what's interesting about it, so the typeface is from old school Soviet propaganda magazines. Those were the fonts they used. And also the dial, the way it spins around, so the minute hand is over here, this little indice, and it spins around in the circle. The hour hand is the triangle. So at different parts and different times of the day, the dial almost looks different because it's at different locations. And also, this dial was inspired, I believe, by El Lissitzky. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. El Lissitzky, he was also an avant-garde artist in the I believe he made a painting in 1924, also of like a revolution against the Bolsheviks, and this triangle was there, but it was in red, which also Raketa has another model. They have 3 different models of the Avant-Garde. This was the Horophile edition with the violet and orange. Then they have one where the triangle, our hand, is red. So that Lisitsky painting, it is red. It was almost like a javelin stabbing through, and this is what inspired this work.
And this is the Avant-Garde. This is the Horophile limited edition of 50 pieces. And of course, the Horophile is Amersindy. But it's got that feel of like 20th century Russian iconography, where it didn't matter what the subject was, a dog, a person, a laborer, a tank, an airplane. Everything was angular and thrusting and had this kinetic sense to it and like a monolithic mass. There was very little that was curvaceous about any of it. But this sort of captures that spirit. Like this is sort of like your hero of the Soviet Union type of design aesthetic. When posters were made, you mentioned it used to be called Victory. It made watches during the war for the armed forces. All of the posters, the propaganda, the public communications from that time, whenever they went to a World's Fair, the USSR booth and the art that was on display, it looked like it was sharp enough to cut you. And this watch really captures that.
And what I love about this watch also, you have about a centuries worth of history all poured into this watch.
And like you said, it goes back to St. Petersburg in 1721. That's a very long-standing tradition. And they do make their own movements.
And the watch itself, it actually came on 2 straps. It was a black strap and an orange strap. And I feel like those 2 straps, they were good straps, but they didn't do justice to this dial, so I put it on a custom strap.
Yes.
And I feel like it looks much better now. The feng shui is a bit more there now with the orange and purple strap kind of to match the dial. Which I think the dial is very subdued too, because you see the purple, the brushed purple, violet color when the light hits it.
Yeah, it's almost like the old, there was a Ford Mustang paint scheme back in the 1990s on the SVTs, and it was exactly like this, where the color would change dramatically depending on the angle of the light, and that dial is exactly like that Mustang.
The lume is super on that too.
Let's talk about a watch that is right up your alley in terms of rarity, exclusivity, color, and character, but not fundamentally a hugely expensive thing. This is almost like a micro brand created by a true horlogerie brand. Tell me about the Mad 1.
Okay, so interesting story with this Mad 1. So Maximilian Bucer, obviously a legend, and who doesn't want a MB&F watch? But you know, those watches cost kidneys and all these other organs. And then when he came out with the Mad 1, I knew I needed to have it. So I ended up buying the first one, which was the blue and the white, the Friends and Family Tribe Edition, because it spoke to me in terms of the design language. The flip movement upside down with the hours and minutes being displayed on the side, which is, again, you don't really see that. Usually to check the time, you look down on your watch, and here you look down, you see what looks like an axe just spinning around looking at you. So I bought that Mad 1 blue and wore it to death. Wore it everywhere. And then the red one came out. I'm like, oh, I really like this Mad 1 red. And I don't like buying the same watch twice in different iterations.
You don't want to have 2 in the collection at once.
Yeah, it depends with what watch, because, you know, like with this one, I have the two-tone as well, for example. But with the Mad, it's just the black strap, and the strap was a bit different from the rubberized leather of the Mad 1 blue, and I just liked it a bit better, or almost equally, and I knew I needed to have it. So I made an exception, like, you know what? These 2 watches could be together in the collection because they do look different due to the colors. Got the Mad 1 red. Then the green came out in the raffle, and I'm like, this looks too similar to the red. It's just way too similar, whereas the red compared to the blue, they look very different and unique from each other. The green one looked too similar to the red. I'm like, not gonna get that one. Then they do a little bit of a preview on their Instagram, like, oh, next raffle coming up, and you see these colors. First thing you think of, oh, Alain Silberstein. I'm like, this is gonna be interesting. And then they give more drops, and you realize it's a French artist, Jean-Charles de Castelbayac. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, you got it.
So I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then they came out with this watch. At first, my first reaction was, time to love on the strap. I'm looking at the colors. I'm looking at the font on the hours.
And it's a handwritten font on the time scroll.
And my first reaction is, looks like a little child doodled this with crayons. I'm like, I think that's a hard pass. I'm like, man, they've completely lost me with this one. Some months go by, and one of the Buser videos of this watch pops up on my YouTube. The algorithm just catered to me. And I'm rewatching this video, and suddenly something inside of me just, boom. It was like almost like hypnotic, and I fell in love with this watch.
And it's a very colorful
Yep.
watch. Like, you didn't see yourself initially lining up with those colors, but
At
it won
all,
you.
at all. I ended up trading actually with the 1916 company. I got rid of my Mad 1 Red, and I ended up coming here to this office a few weeks ago and picking this one up. And man, I love this thing. To me, I think it is the best one. It is my favorite one of the models that came out. I hope the next one they do is a Mad 2 because they need a new design already. I think they've already beat the colors to death.
I think if you're going to go out on a color high, this is definitely it. And you know, the colors mean something. With Alain Silberstein, it means Bauhaus, it means De Stijl, it means design movements from the early 20th century here. Yellow is the warmth of the sun, red is the heat of passion, blue is peace and serenity. It has different meanings, even if they're the same colors. And of course, you know, Jean-Charles de Castelbajac, he is a designer, and he comes from sort of, more than anything, sort of a fashion standpoint. And this watch manages to incorporate all of his philosophies while keeping everything that was fun about the Mad 1. Like you said, you look at the dial, it tells you nothing. It's not until you scroll to the side. Sometimes I find a watch maybe a little bit like Raketa, maybe a little bit like the Mad 1, that asks you to spend just a little bit more time reading the time. It's almost like the watch engages you more, and you love it for that.
But also, Jean-Charles, he's an artist, and what he made here is just, this is as art on the wrist as it gets. And what I really like is the incorporation of the wings, the angel wings,
Yes.
along with the angel over here staring at the moon on the crown.
Yes, the face on the crown.
Yeah, and these wings, they symbolize the time flies, because as it spins, the colors form a rainbow,
Yes.
which I thought was interesting. And also, to me, it symbolizes that just time flies, and it really does. Because when you have certain events happen, like I lost my father this year, everything that came before feels kind of like a blip of time. Everything just feels like one long day. So time flies, and time is something we can't get back. And I think this is an interesting concept to kind of reiterate that. And I know there's a message there in French around the inner dial. I forgot the translation, but it's something along the lines of you have you have a work of art in your hand. Let the time fly, so you are the guardian of your time. Something along those lines. I know I'm butchering it, but
No, you got it perfectly.
yeah, it's
And
something along
it's
those
sort
lines.
of his philosophy of life,
Yeah.
as he would have expressed it succinctly.
And it makes it even more special because time flies and you are the guardian of your time. Don't waste time. Make every moment count. All these moments are precious, and it's time that you'll never get back.
Do you find that with your father's passing, the Breitling that he gave you takes on even greater meaning to you?
Yes and no. The reason for that is, so this was obviously my first watch, and it would have more meaning except in 2016, I seen him browsing in the basement of my parents' house. He had his like office there, and I see him browsing watches, and he enjoyed watches. He had a Omega, was it Seamaster 300 chrono that my grandparents, when my grandfather was alive, they got it for him in 2001, 2002 maybe. Then he got himself a Breguet Type 21 transatlantic chronograph. And then I saw but he would rarely wear the watches. He would wear the Omega, he would rarely wear the Breguet. It was in his watch box. And I see he's looking at watches online. So I kind of creep over, what are you looking at? I see he's looking at a Panerai. And I knew he really liked Panerai. And I see he was looking at the Daylight chronograph. And the Daylight was the one that was made famous by Sylvester Stallone, who also, because of Stallone, who ended up gifting these Panerai watches to his friends, one being Arnold Schwarzenegger, big action stars of the 80s, they're the ones who I feel like ushered in watches gravitating towards bigger sizes, because Panerais are fairly big watches. Now they're making some in size 40, but Panerais have been known for the last few decades to be just hulking watches. And I feel like due to Stallone and that Daylight watch, which from his movie Daylight, he had a Panerai commissioned, he commissioned Panerai for a few of those watches, and the watch was in the movie. And after that, it caught on, because in the 90s, if you look at old movies like Casino, Goodfellas, everyone's wearing small watches. Like De Niro in Casino, which came out in 95, he's wearing mostly Piaget polos.
Yeah, into the mid-90s, a lot of fine watches still looked like this at the time.
And then towards the late 90s, early 2000s, suddenly just size of watches went up, and I think that's predominantly due to the Panerai Daylight. And Stallone and Arnold bringing those watches, because then Arnold wore the Panerai in the movie Racer in 97. And the Daylight Stallone movie was in 95.
And those got a lot of currency with collectors because none of this was sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
And so your dad was looking at this watch. So where did that lead?
So it led me to finding that watch, purchasing it, and gifting it to him for Father's Day to kind of bring it full circle. He got me my first watch, and I wanted to get him what would end up being his last watch. And then when he passed away this year, the watch kind of came back to me. So that has, to me, a bit more sentimental value than this one, unfortunately, just because it was a watch I gave to him that then came back to me. So it's a little bit more important to me, that one. But this to me is historic because this is what got me into watches. If not for this watch, you probably wouldn't see any of these. We probably wouldn't be here having this conversation.
We've talked about watches that have color, that have character, that have individuality, that have a little bit of a quirkiness to them with the Mad 1. But I think the watch on the table that best embodies all of that is this absolutely insane and almost completely unbranded digital time watch from a Mexican who practices in Canada with the wildest strap I've ever seen in my life. Please tell me about your Ronzon.
Oh man, this watch, as Gollum from Lord of the Rings would say, my precious. So this watch, I can never get tired of looking at this watch. Sometimes I take it out of the watch box and I just play with it, I'll photograph it, I'll try it on, I'll take it off. So the story is, I've seen a photo of Aldous Hodge with an interesting looking watch. I didn't know what it was, but the dial caught my eye. I zoomed in, I did some reverse Google image searching. It led me to this watch, which is a jump hour. To me, I love jump hours. It's one of my favorite complications, a jump hour. I like wandering hours, but I never seen one like this. It just looks something completely oddball, especially compared to everything here. This dial is just different to anything else out there. So I found out this is a Ronzon, Fernando Ronzon jump hour. He is based out of Mexico. So he was born in Mexico City. And he got his start, his father was an engineer, and he ended up moving to Canada where he learned how to assemble watches. And then he would restore vintage watches in his free time and as a hobby. And around circa 2016-17, he decided he wants to start making his own watches. So, and this all is through conversation with him. I've become friends with him. We speak. So he told me around 2016-17, he moved back from Toronto, back to Mexico because of the tools and machinery they have there. So he told me that in the 50s and 60s, Mexico had a golden age renaissance for watchmaking, which all got killed by the quartz crisis. But the machinery and the tools are still there, and it's very good tools. And he went back there and started working on these watches. And this thing, man, so I'm very impatient.
Yeah.
If I see a watch, it needs to be on my wrist by the end of the day. I can't wait. So I spoke to Fernando. He told me, okay, I make 4 or 5 of these a year. It's going to take a few months. I'll make you your watch. So then a buddy of mine through Instagram, the watch community is a small but very loving community. A friend of mine who's in Australia had this watch. I contacted him. I said, Roman, how do you like this watch? Oh, it's a great watch. Fernando's wonderful. This watch is awesome. I'm like, okay, so I'm thinking of getting it. Oh yeah, totally. The build quality is there. It's a beautiful watch. You're gonna love it. Like, okay. So I'm sold already. I'm thinking, okay, 3 months, 3, 4 months. I don't want to wait that long. I want it now. I'm like, Jan, practice patience. Just work on this thing, man. And then 2 hours later, he contacts me back and said, you know what? I'll sell you my watch. I'm looking to free up some cash. I have a few other purchases that I'm looking to make with other independent watchmakers. If you want, you'll have this watch by the end of the week. So now this is a Saturday. I'm thinking, you're gonna ship this on Monday? Yeah, I'll have this by Friday. So it's a Saturday. I'm like, okay. 6 days, 7 days, better than 3-4 months. I'm like, I'll have this by the next weekend, just in time for a watch event. So tell him, send me the invoice. Boom, paid the invoice. Cool. I'll have you the tracking number Monday. Monday comes around, boom, tracking number. Watch is there, I think by Thursday, maybe even Wednesday it came, DHL. Right away, I opened it, I'm like, man, this freaking dial, this case back, this is
so modest, almost no, other than the strap, which you had custom made, there's nothing on there, unless you know the guy's design and his work. It is the most modest watch I've ever seen in my life. You cannot find a single maker's mark, other than the design itself.
Yeah, I said, Fernando, why don't you sign your watch? He said, it is signed, but I prefer to sign it with my logo, which is the 2 circles, which almost from far looks like an owl,
Yes.
and the rods that connect the hours, the minutes, and the date. That is my logo, and I want to be known by the logo. And the straps that the watch came on were just regular, not quality straps, I would say.
So now we're talking about the Galaxy strap. You got to tell me about this strap.
So I decided, you know what? This watch needs better. It was a disservice, the straps. It needs something better. So I started looking into straps. I wanted something to match the dial. And then I came across these Galaxy straps. And right away it caught my attention. Like this looks like, open space somewhere.
Yeah,
with
a nebula out in the middle of nowhere.
Planets and stars everywhere, clouds. I've never seen anything like it before. And I found out the material is carp. Which you told me
carp,
similar,
like swims in the water, the fish, carp.
And I was familiar with salmon dials, python, crocodile, alligator, everything. Never seen a carp dial.
I thought it was made from koi. I thought it was made from a fish in a koi pond because it's got those giant scales.
Yep.
It's nothing like salmon leather. It looks like a large land reptile or a big koi.
Yep, so I ordered one. It wasn't this one. It was like a purple. It was similar, but this one has blue and green hues. That one had purple hues. And it came on a deployment buckle, which I wasn't crazy about. It felt a little not sturdy, I guess. But I decided it came right in time for New York Watch Week. So I decided I was going to all these events and like private events with different companies. I decided, you know what, let me double wrist all the days. So one of the days when I went to watch time, I decided to double wrist on the left. I had the Louis Monet.
Yes.
And I decided on the right, I'll put that for Ronzon. And I put it because Aldous Hodge was giving a presentation. It was on the Saturday of the weekend. So like, you know what, maybe he'll have his on and I want to tell him that like, hey, thanks to you, indirectly, you've inspired me to get this watch. So now we're part of this small little club of F. Ronzon watch collectors. So I ran into him. I'm like, look what I got. He's like, oh, that's so cool. I'm like, where's yours? He's like, oh, I'm not wearing any watch because he's coming out with his own
He
Hodge
wants
Atelier.
to clear the scene for his launch.
Yep.
Yes.
So the only watch he's gonna wear is his when it comes out. And at this event, I'm thinking, oh, everyone who's who of collectors is gonna be like, oh, Louis Monet. That was chopped liver. Nobody even looked at the left wrist. Everyone from across the room, what are you wearing? I spotted that watch. I needed to know what it is. The whole weekend, everybody wanted to take photos of it. Everyone to know what it is. Like, what is that? And at this point, I decided I want to switch the Galaxy strap. I wanted to see how it would look on salmon and also try a different supplier. So I found a different manufacturer in Vietnam, and the green caught my eye. I'm like, okay, let me try that. Got in salmon and in carp. And then I spoke to Fernando. I said, Fernando, would you mind if I signed this with your brand name? He's like, oh, that would be incredible. Thank you so much. I said, send me the font. He sent me this font. I gave it to the guy. He printed it. Fernando loves it. I think it gives the watch a better feel now, I guess, now that it's signed here, aside from just his logo that is on the dial. And gives it a more premium look. And this watch You've never seen this before, you said?
I've never seen one of these in person.
And
This
I'll-
is the first I've encountered
And I'll
in
tell
person.
you this, after this episode, if you start seeing them, you know where you saw it first, and you know who wore it first and had it first.
Hey, Jan, you made it happen.
Yep.
But so let me get this straight. You got this from a guy in Australia?
Yes.
So a American born in Ukraine, living in New York, buys a watch from Australia built by a Mexican watchmaker who's
Who lived in
practicing
Canada.
in Canada. So this is about as international as the watch hobby gets. So let's talk about two other kind of world-spanning watches. So here we have a Swiss-made watch designed by a gentleman from Asia, long known as a photographer, but from 2017 making his own watches. Tell me about the Ming 3707.
Okay, so once I got into the micro brands, Ming obviously was at the top of the top, to the point they're already expanded beyond. They're no longer a micro brand. They're already a great independent brand. And what I like about them is that their price range ranges from entry level to super high end. So almost with like these other big brands, you're able to get a Ming and you don't have to spend, say, 50 grand. You could get a Ming for 3 grand. You could get one for 15 grand. And you could get one for 50 grand. So you have options there. And this was their, I believe, 5th anniversary edition. And what I wanted compared to all these other watches is a thin case that could just go under the cuff and at the same time have a sporty feel to it and look to it. And I thought the mosaic dial was super interesting. I always thought mosaic glass patterns were interesting. And when I found out that there's 3 layers there to give that look, I knew I wanted it. And then when I saw the Super Luminova on this, which Ming is kind of known for their Super Luminovas, and boom, here we are. Ended up getting this one. And I knew there's an earlier model, I believe it was a 20.1 Series 2, that also had this, but it was a bigger version, it was a 42.
There was, I think the first version of the Mosaic came out in 2020, and I think this is a 2022 launch right here. But both of them feature that spectacular depth and complexity, and regardless of whether you buy one of Ming Thien's really expensive watches or one of the more entry-level pieces, you get one standard of aesthetics, his. They're all very refined, very clever, everything from the flare of the lugs to the layered sapphires, the use of lume, the double-step micro-adjustable buckle. The fact that it's a very sporty watch, steel, 100 meters water resistant and well loomed, but only 38 millimeters. It's a very different kind of watch, and also sort of shows your evolution as a collector away from 46 millimeters and 45.5 to watches that are now smaller and vintage or more compact but contemporary. And it really is kind of interesting to see how the shape and sizes of your watches sort of frame your collecting journey.
So what's interesting with Ming, I love the flared lugs, but what I really love is the design language, that you can be across the room, and if you're wearing a Ming, you'll know that's a Ming because of their design language. And they're doing just so many beautiful things. Right now, they won the award for their Bluefin dive watch. And to me, the best watch personally that I've seen released this year was their, I think it's also the 20.1 Series 3 with the 600 laser etched engravings with the Luminova, the rose gold.
It's an explosive dial.
Yeah, that to me is the best release of the year. That watch is, oh man, that watch is truly something special. And I'm happy to, be part of a Ming club before Ming becomes a real household name, because right now, it's a name that's being built up amongst collectors, but I feel like due to the design language and also the build quality, they're getting better and better. Their models that they're coming out, they're getting more interesting. Everything is so different, so unique. No 2 models look the same. Even the other model with the mosaic looks completely different aside from that center mosaic pattern. And I feel like this is a brand that maybe 5, maybe 10 years from now is going to be a household name.
We've got another sort of world-spanning watch. I don't think you're done with this thought, though.
There's
I wanna
only
make sure we get
one
there.
thing that I don't like about this watch is these straps that they made, the tuck-away straps. I thought it would be more comfortable, but it's a bit of a pain to get it off. You kind of have to tuck at it, and even when you put it in, it kind of shaves the skin a bit, and you have to kind of tuggle it around to get it right. So I'm not really, that's the only gripe I have with this. But again, it's not the watch, it's just the strap. But that's nothing.
Then again, it is a small enough builder that if you reach out to them, you know that you'll be heard. I think if maybe you're not happy with the buckle on an Omega, you're probably out of luck with Ming. You might actually get a response. Now this takes us back home to New York City via Phil Toledano and Alfred Chan. So Phil's a local car and watch enthusiast. He's a visual artist. He's a pretty creative guy. Alfred Chan has a great eye for design. I'm not actually sure they met each other in the course of designing the watch you see right here, the B1. Tell me about the B1.
Oh man, so this is one of my favorite watches, and so the story with this watch, and so I had a watch buddy that I met through Instagram about, this would be probably April, maybe March or April of 2023. We used to discuss watches, send photos of different watches back and forth towards each other, to each other. And one day he sends me this Toledano Chan Instagram page. He's like, take a look. And I look at the profile photo, and it is just a small piece of this dial, but the piece that's angular and not really squared. And then the main photo underneath the profile, the one and only photo, had pieces of the links. And right away, I fell in love with this thing. I didn't fully see what it was, but I could picture in my head, I got the idea, I got the gist of what it was, and I knew I needed to have it. These links, to me, I think this is one of the most beautiful bracelets. This is, to me, I feel like this watch is a future icon. And right away, I didn't know who Phil was at the time. So through the Toledano Chan Instagram, I saw who the founders were. So I contacted Phil. I saw he's a conceptual design artist based in New York. So I'm like, oh, perfect. I'm in New York. He's in New York. And I started bothering him. Every few weeks to months, when is this coming out? When is this coming? Oh, are you guys gonna, release any photo? I wanted to see the full thing. Unfortunately, one of my flaws is I'm impatient, especially when it comes to watches. I wanted to see this. I wanted to have it. And from the time when I first saw it, it took about a year for it to actually come out. There were some pushbacks because obviously, this was their first watch, and they had to go through the R&D and the trial and error, and there were some pushbacks to October and then January, and finally it released, I believe, May of this year. And I hope Phil doesn't hate me because I really pestered him for a whole year, every few months, few weeks. Show some photos, upload something. When is this watch coming out? But it was worth it at the end, and he asked me, so there's 175 of them made. Do you want a specific number? I said, you know what? I want number 4 because I'm born October 4th. So I felt like that would give it that much more, it would make it that much more special to me to have my birth date on the watch.
So you were 04 of 175 on this case back.
Yep, and this is beautiful. I think there's nothing like it. So the inspiration was obviously the Rolex King Midas as well as brutalist architecture. And this dial, the whole case, is the window of the Marcel Breuer brutalist architecture building that he did for the Whitney Museum that's up on Madison and I believe 75th.
So the Rolex reference is obvious. The architectural reference, that's not. That's
well, to me, the Rolex, so it was inspired by the King Midas, but I feel like only as a destro watch because the crown is on the left side.
When you look at it, it's very different from the Rolex King Midas. It's like you see it at first, you're like, oh, King Midas. Then you compare them side by side, you're like, oh, this isn't the same at all.
The thing is, you only think King Midas if you know it's a destro, because on Instagram, and I even joke around with Phil, like you gotta have like an instruction manual for this watch because people are wearing it with the crown on the right side. Because no one's realizing it's a destro watch.
Yeah, you could wear it upside down and it would be perfectly acceptable as a timekeeper.
But it's interesting, they did a great job with this case because it really does look like it took the inspiration from that Marcel Breuer
And this is exactly the kind of watch that Phil loves to collect. He's a vintage collector. Marcel Breuer, I would also say Patek Philippe. I would also say the Rolex King Midas. I would also say a million obscure brands that populate his Instagram. This is very much Phil. This feels more Phil than Chan.
And one of the things with this watch, I don't even know if Phil and Alfred know this. So the case was inspired by the window. But underneath the window, the wall of that building, it's not a flat wall. It has these curves. And I don't know if they even realize, but the links kind of remind me of those curves.
Yes.
Because the links, they're polished, they're brushed, and in between the links, they're sandblasting. So depending on what angle and which way the light hits it, it gives the links shading. So it almost looks, it's a piece of sculpture, it's architecture on the wrist. And when the light hits it again, due to the sandblasting, you get different looks. And it's very hard. I told Phil, It's very hard to get this watch on photo and on video because the eye, especially in natural lighting, when the sun hits it, it's completely different. When I first saw the photo, when it fully released on the day of, like 2 weeks before the release, I remember I'm walking with my dogs and I know they're gonna drop the photos at 9 o'clock. I'm like, oh, finally, after a year, I get to see the photo. I come back and I look at the photo, I'm kind of, inside I was a bit like, oh, a year of hype, and I felt a bit like, that's not what I was hoping for. But then he did an unveiling before the release to people in New York to see the watch. So I drove down to Manhattan and I saw the watch in person. I'm like, yes, it's everything I wanted. And I told him, like, photos don't do this watch justice. You cannot photograph this, especially on an iPhone. You need natural light to really...
You seem to be drawn to watches, the Ming, the Project 01, of course, the B1. These are all watches that do not photograph well. I think these are all watches that have to be seen.
Yeah.
And I would even go so far as to say, in terms of embodying brutalism, I've seen the Remaster 02 from AP, and having seen this now in person, this is the best brutalist watch of the year.
This, to me, I think this is a gorgeous watch. From a design and aesthetic point of view, there's nothing like it at all on the market. And that's why I think this is going to be a future icon.
I will say this, I like the AP. I give AP a lot of grief, but I also think the Remaster 02 is a great looking watch and one of its best releases in years. I still think this is better. Everything you said, the contrast, the finish is subtle, the angularity, they take it right up to the point that it would cut you, and then they file it down just enough so it won't. The details between the individual links, the way they interlock, the solidity of it, the lapis dial, the geometries of it, the local references, the art references, the architectural references, the historical references. For a watch that costs, what, about $4,000? It is an amazing feat of design and assembly. It legitimately looks and feels a lot more expensive.
The build quality, they used the 904 Rolex steel for this one. And I feel it gives it more of like a heavy duty feel. And then also, look at this box. They gave a concrete box for the watch. So they really put effort not only into the design and the build quality, but the full presentations, the full shebang. They didn't, skim out on a box, on a regular cheap looking box. This is brutalist, look at this. Just raw concrete.
Jan, this has been an unbelievable privilege to share your thoughts, your time, and your collection. I got to thank you. This has been a blast.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
And until then, time out.